2016 was one of those rare years where it felt like everyone dropped something important. It didn't matter what genre you listened to, pop, R&B, hip-hop, indie, rock, there was an album that felt personal to you. And not just good albums, albums that people still talk about, albums that shifted culture, albums that felt intentional. It was also the year of surprise drops. Artists didn't need months of promo anymore. They just released the music, and the world stopped to listen. Streaming was taking over, but albums still felt like full experiences. You sat with them. You argued about them. You replayed them front to back. Some of these records were political. Some were deeply emotional. Some were experimental. But all of them felt like artists taking risks instead of playing it safe. So this isn't about sales. It's not about charts. This is about the albums from 2016 that critics respected, fans connected with, and that still hold weight years later. At number 10, we have A Tribe Called Quest with We Got It From Here. Thank you for your service. This album felt bigger than just a comeback. Tribe hadn't released a full project in almost 20 years, so expectations were high, but no one expected it to sound this alive. Instead of leaning on nostalgia, they made something that felt urgent and current. It was released shortly after the passing of Phife Dawg, which gave the album emotional weight. You can hear that emotion throughout the record. It feels reflective, but also energized. There's anger, humor, clarity, and purpose all at once. What really stood out was how modern it sounded. The production didn't feel stuck in the 90s. It blended classic Tribe elements with contemporary sounds and features from newer artists. It connected generations of hip-hop in a really natural way. Lyrically, the album tackled politics, race, and social tension, and in 2016, those conversations felt especially heavy. It didn't feel preachy, it just felt honest. That's why so many critics ranked it among the best albums of the year. It wasn't just a strong return, it was proof that legends can still evolve. At number 10, this album represents legacy done right. At number 9, we have Solange with A Seat at the Table. This album felt quiet, but powerful. When it came out in 2016, it didn't rely on big singles or flashy production. Instead, it created a mood. The production was soft, minimal, and warm. It gave space for Solange's voice and message to really sit with you. The album focused on identity, race, self-worth, and healing. It wasn't loud about it. It didn't try to shock anyone. It just spoke calmly and honestly. That's what made it hit so hard. Songs like Cranes in the Sky became instant standouts. The writing felt personal, but also universal. A lot of people saw themselves in it. Critics praised the album for its cohesion. It felt intentional from start to finish, the transitions, the interludes, the tone. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was an experience. What also made it special was timing. In 2016, conversations around race and identity were intense, and this album gave those conversations a reflective, emotional soundtrack. At number 9, A Seat at the Table represents subtle strength. It didn't shout to be heard. It simply spoke, and people listened. At number 8, we have Bon Iver with 22 A Million. When this album came out, it surprised a lot of people. Bon Iver had been known for emotional, folk-driven music, very stripped back and organic. But 22 A Million was different. It was fragmented, electronic, distorted, and experimental. At first listen, it almost felt confusing. But that was the point. The album felt like someone trying to process emotion in real time. The vocals were layered and manipulated. The song titles were abstract. The production felt broken in places. And yet, underneath all of that, there was still vulnerability. It wasn't easy listening, but it was rewarding. Critics praised it for taking risks. It didn't try to repeat what had worked before. Instead, it pushed forward. Over time, more listeners began to appreciate it for how bold it was. It's the kind of album that grows on you. The more you sit with it, the more it opens up. At number 7, we have Rihanna with Anti. This was a turning point for her. Before Anti, Rihanna was known for hit after hit, big singles, radio domination, clean pop structure. But with this album, she slowed things down and made something moodier and more personal. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel like it was chasing charts. It felt intentional. The production was darker, more minimal, and more experimental. Songs like Love on the Brain showed a raw vocal side of her that people hadn't fully heard before. Needed Me had a cold, confident energy. Work became a global hit, but even that song felt different from traditional pop. At first, some listeners didn't know what to expect because it wasn't packed with obvious radio singles. But over time, it became clear that this was one of her strongest projects. Critics praised Anti for its cohesion and risk-taking. It felt like Rihanna stepping fully into her own identity instead of playing into expectations. At number 7, Anti represents growth. It showed that a global pop star could take creative risks and still connect deeply with people. At number 6, we have Chance the Rapper with Coloring Book. This project felt joyful. In a year where many albums were heavy and emotional, Coloring Book brought light. It blended hip-hop with gospel influences in a way that felt uplifting without being cheesy. You could hear happiness in it. What made it even more interesting was how it was released. It wasn't a traditional album sold in stores. It was technically a mixtape, released primarily through streaming. And yet, it went on to win major awards and become one of the most talked about projects of the year. That alone made it important. The production was colorful and energetic, and the features added to the vibe without taking over. But at the center of it all was Chance's personality. He sounded grateful, confident, and proud of where he came from. Critics praised it for being optimistic and authentic. It didn't try to be dark just for the sake of depth. It felt sincere. And number 6, Coloring Book represents independence and positivity. It showed that you could succeed outside the traditional industry system and still make something that resonated widely. At number 5, we have Radiohead with A Moon-Shaped Pool. This album felt quiet, but heavy. Radiohead had already built a reputation for pushing boundaries, but A Moon-Shaped Pool wasn't about shock or experimentation for attention. It was slow, emotional, and reflective. The orchestration was beautiful, with strings carrying a lot of the atmosphere. It felt like an album about endings. There was a sense of distance and sadness throughout it. Tom York's vocals sounded vulnerable in a way that felt very personal. Songs like Burn the Witch and Daydreaming stood out, but the album really works best when you listen from start to finish. Critics praised it for its maturity. It didn't try to recreate past eras. It sounded like a band comfortable in their own space, making music on their own terms. What made it special in 2016 was how patient it was. In a year full of surprise drops and fast consumption, this album asked you to slow down and really listen. At number 5, A Moon-Shaped Pool represents emotional depth. It's not loud or flashy, it just sits with you. At number 4, we have David Bowie with Black Star. This album felt different the moment it arrived. When Black Star was released in January 2016, it already sounded bold and experimental. The production blended art rock with jazz influences. The songs were long, layered, and sometimes unsettling. It didn't sound like someone playing it safe, it sounded like an artist still pushing boundaries. Then, just days after the release, David Bowie passed away. That changed everything. Suddenly, the album felt like a farewell. Lyrics that once seemed abstract now felt intentional. The tone felt reflective. It became clear that Bowie had crafted this project knowing it would be his last. Critics praised it not just because of the timing, but because of the quality. It was creative, ambitious, and fearless. Even at the end of his life, Bowie was still evolving. What made Black Star so powerful in 2016 was how complete it felt. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't a safe final project. It was challenging and artistic. At number 4, Black Star represents legacy, not as something looking backward, but as something still moving forward until the very end. At number 3, we have Kanye West with The Life of Pablo. This album felt chaotic, but in a way that worked. From the rollout alone, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal release. The title changed multiple times. The track list changed. And even after it was officially out, Kanye kept updating it. Songs were edited. Mixes were adjusted. It felt unfinished on purpose. But underneath the chaos, there was something special. The Life of Pablo blended gospel, rap, soul, and experimental production. It had big, energetic tracks and quiet, reflective moments. Some songs felt polished, others felt raw. That mix made it feel human. Critics were divided at first, but over time, many saw it as one of the most interesting albums of the streaming era. It reflected the internet age, messy, fast, always evolving. It also captured Kanye at a very exposed point in his life. You could hear the tension between ego and vulnerability, between faith and fame. At number 3, The Life of Pablo represents unpredictability. It wasn't perfect, but it was bold, influential, and impossible to ignore in 2016. At number 2, we have Frank Ocean with Blonde. This album felt intimate. After years of silence following Channel Orange, the anticipation was huge. But when Blonde finally arrived, it didn't sound like a typical comeback. It was soft, minimal, and emotionally layered. The production was stripped back. Sometimes it felt almost unfinished, long pauses, subtle instrumentals, vocals that drifted in and out. But that space made the emotions hit harder. It felt like Frank was thinking out loud. Lyrically, the album explored love, identity, memory, and growing up. There was nostalgia throughout it, a feeling of looking back at who you used to be. Songs like Nikes, Ivy, and Self-Control became fan favorites because they felt so honest. Critics praised Blonde for its restraint. It didn't try to impress with big moments. It trusted quiet details. Over time, it's become one of the most respected albums of the decade. At number 2, Blonde represents vulnerability. It proved that sometimes the softest album can leave the strongest impact. At number 1, we have Beyoncé with Lemonade. This album felt like a moment. When Lemonade dropped in 2016, it wasn't just music, it was a full experience. It came with a visual film, strong storytelling, and a clear emotional journey from start to finish. The album moved through anger, betrayal, healing, empowerment, and self-worth. It felt deeply personal, but also bigger than just one story. It touched on race, identity, and womanhood in a way that felt intentional and powerful. Musically, it didn't stay in one lane. It blended R&B, rock, country, pop, and hip-hop without feeling scattered. Each song had its own identity, but together they formed something cohesive. Critics praised it for ambition and execution. It was bold but controlled, emotional but precise. It felt like an artist fully in command of her vision. Beyond reviews, it shaped conversations. People didn't just listen to Lemonade, they discussed it. It became part of culture. At number 1, Lemonade represents impact. It wasn't just one of the best albums of 2016, it was one of the most important albums of the decade.